Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where we bring evidence, experience, and perspective to make sense of today's leading health challenges. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
This is Lindsay Smith-Rogers. Today, Stephanie Desmon talks to Jeff Michael, a distinguished scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Injury Research and Policy and a former federal traffic safety official, about the alarming rate of pedestrian deaths, 100 a day being seen around the U.S. They discuss how difficult it is to change behavior and some strategies that could spark a reduction in deaths. Let's listen.
Jeff Michael, thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. Nice to be with you.
I wanted to talk today about sort of the record, or at least record for the last 40 years in pedestrian road deaths. You know, I called on you because before you came to Hopkins, you spent 30 years with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And so I know you've been following this for a very long time. So talk to me about sort of what the numbers look like and why we should be concerned.
Well, thanks again for your interest in this area. It doesn't get enough attention. The number of pedestrian fatalities is just alarming. It's gone up almost 80% over the past decade, between 2010 and 2020. It's really worrying. It's still it's not the greatest part of motor vehicle crash deaths. It's approaching 20% of motor vehicle crash deaths. But these are people, walking along the road, getting struck by cars, vulnerable road users, and they're, obviously getting the worst of the safety problem. So health problem is complicated, like most health problems, I guess. There isn't a single cause for it. There's likely a number of factors, ranging from exposure, urbanization, people moving to cities where 80% or 85% of pedestrian fatalities happen. And that's, just because that's where the most cars and people are, the most interaction in urban areas. There's been a lot of talk recently about the increasing proportion of light trucks and sport utility vehicles, SUVs. And so that is certainly a factor, but it's hard to pin it on that alone. The shape of light trucks and SUVs is such that they're harder on pedestrians when they strike. Other potential factors, some have suggested increasing anxiety levels among motorists and less social contact and social responsibility, leading to higher risk driving, etc. Also, the environment is not what it should be. There are not good pedestrian facilities on many of our roads. And so people have to walk along in the street or very close to the street, or there's poor lighting, there's not enough crosswalks. So there's just lots of things going on, but they conspire to move the problem into crisis level.
I would also imagine that people on their cell phones, both walking and in their cars, probably contributed to this as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. The problem of driver distraction is a familiar one. Obviously, a driver who is taking their eyes, their mind, and their hands off the wheel at the same time is very dangerous. But pedestrians walking along looking at their cell phone doesn't help either. So there's a very interesting movement in road safety going on here that has very much to do with pedestrian safety. It's called the safe system approach. It's an idea that the U.S. is really just getting going on. The Congress has put serious resources behind this, the last highway authorization bill, and the administration has endorsed this safe system approach as the way that states and localities should be approaching road safety. It's familiar to public health people. It's an environmental approach. It is an effort to accommodate human injury tolerance and human behavior. So you design the roads to prevent the types of crashes that have lethal impacts, and you expect people to behave like people. You expect people to be distracted, to make predictable errors, and design the roads that those errors don't result in fatalities. So that movement will help a lot with pedestrian fatalities. The infrastructure changes we'd hope to see in this movement are greater separation of vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic, and bicycle traffic as well, for that matter. But the best way to protect pedestrians is to separate them from traffic. If you mix people and moving vehicles, it's inevitable that you'll have incidents.
That sounds like a big undertaking. I mean, how long is that going to take?
Well, it will take a long time, but we have 4 million miles of roads in the U.S. And so it will take a long time to change the infrastructure. But from a public health point of view, time will happen. You got to start this. And I started in road safety 30 years ago, and I can attest 30 years happens, So you got to start these things. And if it takes 30 years, it takes 30 years. But 30 years from now, we don't want to be where we were 30 years ago. So you have to start those things, and you have to do everything else as well. So it can certainly be better, and we need to commit ourselves to putting the effort in to do that.
You mentioned sort of the issue that people don't really respect one another as much as they used to, and sort of that whole, I guess, maybe almost the road rage kind of stuff. And I'm wondering what kind of impact you think that has? Like what role does that play?
I'm sure that it has an effect, and I think many of us have read articles about this a phenomenon such as this may be related to changes in traffic enforcement. A tendency I've observed over the years in working with traffic behavioral programs is that traffic rules sort of shape norms, and enforcement sort of accelerates the effect. And so drinking and driving is a good example. Attitudes about drinking and driving have changed incredibly over the past 40 years. That coincided with a movement towards stricter laws and stricter enforcement. And the laws incrementally over a period of 15 years or so increased state by state. And along with that increase came sort of accommodation in attitudes about drinking and driving. So the same thing happened with seatbelt use. An accumulation of state laws for requiring seatbelt use and child safety seat use shifted attitudes, not only behavior, but also attitudes about the necessity for these kinds of prevention activities.
How can we shift attitudes now? It feels like a really good time to do so.
That's a big challenge. I was in Sweden last week at a Vision Zero conference. So Sweden developed that safe system concept that I mentioned, sort of this environmental, human-centered approach to our design of our roadway system. They adopted it in the mid-90s and reduced their fatalities by about half. They're now focused on the second half, and they are asking the question you just asked is, well, will the same things work? Can we get the second half done with the same approach we took in the first half? Part of that is, where do we look for leadership? How do we make the changes that we know need to be made? How do we implement roundabouts in place of high-risk intersections? How do we narrow lanes in congested areas so that cars are moving slower? How do we build protected pedestrian and bicycle facilities, et cetera? We've been looking to the government to do these for the leadership in making these changes. Can governments do it anymore? Can governments get public support that they need to dedicate the resources or to create the new laws or rules necessary for these changes? And so the Swedes are looking more to the private sector now, looking more to corporate social responsibility as part of the larger sustainable development goals advanced by the United Nations. So I think that's a good question is, do we need to start thinking about where we get leadership for road safety in a different way?
As an avid walker, as the mother of 2 teen drivers, I mean, the whole thought of this is just so frightening. And I guess it just makes me wonder why it's taking so long for there to be any movement.
That's another interesting psychological question. Why is there relatively little concern about road safety when other types of transportation safety, get far more attention? It cited analogy as an airline crash. An airline crash gets huge attention because it might kill several hundred people at one time. Meanwhile, 100 people a day die in motor vehicle crashes, and it doesn't get attention. A more common, I won't say ubiquitous, but a more common attitude that road fatalities are a price we pay for modern society. And it's just not, it just doesn't have to be true, as can be seen by, other cultures like Sweden, which are not so different than ours. They've just reprioritized their needs.
Well, this has been a really interesting discussion. Jeff Michael, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Public Health on Call is a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and Stephanie Desmon. Audio production by J.B. Arbogast, Holly Cardinale, Philip Porter, Spencer Greer, and Matthew Martin, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo. Social media run by Grace Fernandez and Shian Briscoe. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening.